Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis blog. This is an episode about what almost everyone gets wrong about the so called placebo effect and why that really matters and why it's important. So, on quite a few occasions, clients have asked me, that thing that you're doing, is it just the placebo effect? And just by the fact that someone asks such a question, shows me how they fundamentally misunderstand what the so called placebo effect is all about. So, understand this about us human beings. We human beings, our brains see patterns, detect patterns, create and project patterns, and we're fundamentally storytellers. We make up meaning about stuff. And then we feel, live, behave, and act as if those meanings are true. We actually project meaning onto objects and then kind of pretend that the meaning that we projected into the objects are inherent in the objects themselves. So, first of all, most people have a tendency to think that the placebo is nothing, that it's a sham, it's nothing there, and this is why a lot of medical doctors will often think about the placebo as something kind of negative to be eliminated, so that one can find medical treatments that really have an effect. But it's not nothing that people respond to, it's their own projection of meaning. And that is something. So we project onto a medical doctor or a surgery or a drug or some intervention method, hypnotic induction, whatever it might be, we project onto that it has some healing qualities. And then we feel, act, and live as if that's true. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you look at life, life itself is essentially a placebo experience. It's essentially a placebo and nocebo experience. You know, if you, I'll give you a couple of fun examples. So, I'm working with a client these days, and she told me that she had a big epiphany because she used to have thundering headaches for years that were really, really bad, and nothing worked to take those headaches away. But then the day her husband moved out, they vanished. Like they vanished completely from one day until the next. And then whenever the husband came home to pick up some luggage and pick up some belongings, the headaches would come back. As soon as he left, the headaches would disappear, right? And this blew her mind. She had never made that connection because she had this very physicalist view of symptoms. And her story is not an uncommon one, right? That very often symptoms are not diseases per se; they're forms of communication. They're meaningful. It may be a way of setting boundaries or attempting to assert ourselves or to avoid feeling certain things or to avoid knowing certain things, right? Now, the really interesting thing is, of course, that when she met her husband originally, since she obviously dated him and married him at some point, initially probably when he came around, she probably felt joy and happiness and attraction and excitement and all sorts of stuff. And of course, later on in the relationship, she would feel a headache when he was around. And perhaps the day he moved out, there was some other woman somewhere who felt excited for him to come around. So now her husband, I don't know her husband. He may have certain personality tendencies or characteristics that made him a difficult partner, or not. But at some point, she projected certain qualities onto him, and probably used the headache as a way of not having to feel whatever she was feeling, and probably also as a way to set boundaries and to communicate. So if we talk about someone's headaches, for example, so perhaps a brain scan could have shown that while she had the headaches, that there was a difference in blood flow, or certain blood vessels expanded or contracted, or different areas of the brain being more active. And then you might say, oh, that particular brain activity is the cause of the headache, and so on and so forth. But it's really it's really an unfortunate thing that our medical systems and our medical doctors are so reductionistic, because it all that may well be true, but it's very partial, because it completely eliminates our subjectivity, uh, our meaning making, the notion that a symptom can be a form of communication. Um, I had another client very recently who fixed his own allergy, his own dog allergy, with my help. And this guy had suddenly gotten very allergic around dogs around 2 years ago. And I, who tend to view symptoms as forms of communication, and who view an allergy essentially as a phobia of the mind body system, of the immune system, so to speak, my question then is, well, why then? What was going on 2 years ago that suddenly changed his meaning making, that suddenly made his immune system uh, change his representations of dogs from something that was safe, passive immune response, into something that warranted an active immune response, as if it was a virus? And by exploring and talking to him a bit and probing, as I'm bound to do, he had the realization that during that time of life, he was under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. He neglected his sleep, which is a dangerous thing to do. He neglected rest and recreation. And of course, him and his partner had dogs, and he would get up with the dogs at 5 to walk them with not enough sleep. It didn't take that long for him to suddenly realize that, given his sleep deprivation and how he was living, that might have been enough, which it was in his case, for his internal system, his inner intelligence, to suddenly mark out the dogs as threatening. So suddenly he had an allergic response around dogs. And once he got that and worked with that a bit, the whole allergy thing disappeared. Again, if you're used to think of these things in conventional ways, these things may seem far-fetched or unusual or uncommon. I promise you, based upon a lot of experience and seeing clients all the time, that they're actually not. This is very, very common. It's just that people are so used to thinking of these things as diseases that are just the result of something chemical or hormonal or genetic, that's just happening to them, and which has nothing to do with meaning making, relationships, emotions, subjectivity, what's going on. And this, of course, is a huge, huge fucking disaster. So a lot of chronic pain and chronic symptoms are not there because they are necessarily inherently chronic, But I will claim that they are more likely there due to trying to work with them from an exclusive disease, biochemical, let's exclude the human being paradigm that's very incomplete and leaves out a lot of possibility for insight and change. So the really interesting thing too, when clients ask, for example, well, I have depression, or I have anxiety, or I have this mental illness, is what you're doing just a placebo effect? As if there's such a thing as an illness, that and there's this other thing called a treatment that can then affect the said illness, right? This is nonsense. Realize, I've made a video about this in the past, but realize that what people call psychotherapy is a myth. There is no therapy. There is nothing to cure. The whole notion of mental illness is a metaphorical diagnosis. I'm not saying that people aren't suffering or that people aren't in pain. What I am saying is that there's nothing medically wrong. There's no cell pathology behind these diagnoses. So the diagnoses are metaphorical ones. And of course, psychiatrists are an extremely intellectually dishonest profession for marketing metaphorical diagnosis as if they're a literal diagnosis. They might say, well, anxiety is a chemical imbalance in the brain in the same way that cancer or diabetes. No, it's not. No, it's not. So my favorite analogy here comes from the late psychiatrist Thomas Sauce. And he used to say, look, if you go into a bar and you ask for a screwdriver, the bartender knows that this is a metaphor. He's never going to throw an actual working tool over the counter. He knows that you're not asking for that. Instead, you're going to get a drink, some combination of vodka and orange juice and God knows what else in it. The screwdriver is a metaphor. So, a mental illness diagnosis stands in relation to an actual medical diagnosis, the same way that the drink, the metaphorical screwdriver, stands in relation to the actual working tool. So remember this, there is just the meaning making. There is no separate disease outside of that then gets cured or fixed by a particular treatment. This is this is a myth. Now, very interestingly as well, when people say, um, and also the fact that people may have various symptoms does not necessarily in and of itself mean that something's wrong in the medical sense. The client, I don't know if she ever had her brain scanned, but the client whose headaches disappeared the day her husband left, the pain is real, not discounting her suffering at all, but that pain is in and of itself not evidence that there's anything wrong with her brain until some cell pathology is actually diagnosed. The guy with the allergy. There's nothing wrong with him. It was just a form of communication that was misunderstood. So psychotherapy, when I say that psychotherapy is a myth, psychotherapy would be if you tried to use psychological tools or insights to alter or change or cure an actual disease. Let's say a psychological intervention, for example, for cancer. That would be an attempt at psychotherapy or hypnotherapy. And sometimes people do actually make those of changes too. And when they do, you could call it a successful application of psychotherapy or hypnotherapy. But unless that's involved, you're not actually practicing psychotherapy or hypnotherapy or whatever it might be. So your entire life is a placebo nocebo type effect. You people might say, "Oh, well, when I get that car, I'll be happy," or they feel a sense of pride as they drive their new car, or go out with their pretty date, or get the promotion at work, or have kids, or whatever. And this is of course all meaning making. So I've seen some very interesting arguments sometimes where so-called skeptics say, well, the government should really crack down on these placebo-based treatments so that we're left with real medicine, these charlatans. They don't really realize even that the state is a placebo phenomena in and of itself. Now, it's a collective placebo or nocebo phenomena. So realize that at one point, if you ask me, are you a Norwegian? I would have to say, yes, I'm a Norwegian. I have a Norwegian passport, born and raised. This is, according to our society, objectively true. But I think we also have to recognize the subjectivity behind that alleged objectivity. Meaning, at some point, some folks went around and arbitrarily drew up some maps and some borders and said, this is Norway, and this is Sweden, and this is Finland, and this is Denmark, and so on and so forth. And people agreed to it, and they live and feel and act as if it's true. Right? But it has no truth outside of that collective hallucination. Now, of course, you have to, in a society, play along with that and bring your passport to the airport and pretend as if it's real. But it's all created by thought, in a sense. It has no reality outside of that. Even money, you know, money in of itself, we collectively hallucinate a certain amount of value onto some paper, and we live, act, and feel as if it's true. Now, of course, these are collective hallucinations that you have to go along with to be functional in society. Yes, if you don't pay your rent, you'll get evicted from your apartment. That is true. And if you try to get into certain countries, you don't have the right passport. Or you can't just go live wherever you want to, but you don't have the right passport. So these are real consequences per se. But I can look at you and say, yes, I am a Norwegian, but I can also say there is no such thing as a Norwegian. It's made up, and there's a certain freedom to be gained in seeing that these distinctions are all made by thought. These meanings that we attribute, feel, and live and act as if are true are fundamentally arbitrary and made up, right? So I'm not saying that there aren't objective facts, but I'm saying that there's a lot of subjectivity behind most of the alleged objectivity. And here's where exploring topics such as symptoms and the so-called placebo effect and these things can give you some insights. So I hope this was useful. If you resonate with my way of thinking and working, know that I see clients every day from all over this spinning planet. If you want to book a session or if you're looking for some mentoring, you can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Till next time, hope this was useful and inspiring.